Hello and welcome to ChatDPS. I'm back from PNG, and so's Adam Green, and we're back with Adam Cunningham and Robert Feldman, and we're going to be talking about a few things this week. So, what happened whilst we were away? There was a big outage, apparently. Now, I knew nothing about this, and just reading about it, so I didn't feel the effect of it. But there were a couple of people here that did, and there's some commentary around that. Robert, I'd just like to kick off with yourself around what actually happened. You know, Adam Green and I weren't here; we were somewhere else doing real work. So whilst you guys were apparently, being, in trying to do work, Telstra were doing their best to stop you. Is that a fair analogy?
Yeah, that's right. So yet another major network outage from a major mobile provider, and similar to the Optus one that we saw last year, in that there was some glitch, which we can talk about a little bit more,
Glitch.
and one of the consequences was 000 failures. So that's a big
Again.
concern. Again. And one of the other key consequences, other than people not being able to access their network, whether on Telstra or Boost or Audi or one of the other resellers, but in particular, trains and the Victorian train system went down for at least a couple of days. So significant consequences there. And I think it breaks down into a few things if we want to get down into the detail, which is crisis communications and how Telstra handled that. What do we think went wrong? And then there's probably something around 000 and the resilience of that particular service. And then also the resilience of particular sectors that rely on Telstra and maybe a single provider.
Yeah.
So there's a few things we can go into more detail.
Okay, so let's start with you mentioned about crisis management. So the one thing that Optus did rather badly through that period that was pretty well globally acknowledged was the fact that their crisis management was reasonably poor. So what can we say about the crisis management that Telstra ran?
Well, from my observation, looks like they got in front of media pretty quickly. Said they were sorry, said they were still investigating it. So initially it was the CFO who was acting CEO.
Yeah.
Vicky Brady was overseas at the time, and I think he was getting a bit of kudos for the way he handled those first couple of days. Then the CEO cut her family holiday short, and she was back, and she was straight into a press conference. So they've said their sorries. They've tried to explain the glitch. It probably doesn't help in terms of some of the consequences, because clearly the federal government are not happy with them. They've got to produce a report in the next, I think, 45 days, and there'll be an
Yeah.
inquiry, and they'll be dragged in front of that. So there's all that pain to go through still. But the initial response is the processes that they enacted in order to send out notifications, do welfare checks for failed 000 calls. Seems like it went pretty well.
So, so moving on then, you've got every organization of this kind of size has legacy, and even smaller for that matter, has legacy hardware. I mean, it's not, you can't just literally go in there and lift and shift all this stuff. I mean, let's talk to somebody technical about this. Adam Cunningham, have you got any observations around, I mean, it's critical infrastructure, but at the same time, there's a dependency on it and it's legacy hardware. And, there's obviously processes around that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of processes in Telstra around upgrade of technology. The issue you've got is a lot of the foundational technology is built a long time ago and goes through its process of life cycle upgrades. And as it goes through, especially at a time like the move from G to you have a lot of new technology that comes in and isn't compatible with a divergence of what they had originally. And this is where you end up with these areas where you go, oh, we've got legacy and it's a bigger problem. And for Telstra, this has happened a lot. A company that's been around for a very long time with a lot of complex technology mixed together. So to come out and say they should, do this one change or upgrade this one thing, it's not as simple
No.
as that for them to actually enact across the board. It'll be interesting to see what the plan is. The thing the government wants from them is a plan to resolve the risk of these issues going forward. Because remember, they've got 5 nines, I think, is their uptime. So that means that they can technically be down for like 5.5 minutes a year, and it's fine. They still meet their 5 nines. So it doesn't mean that you're up forever and nothing goes down, but they've really gone into that. I think 4 nines was like 50 minutes and 3 nines was like 8 hours, 8.5 hours down a
Yeah.
year. I think that's where they're at now.
Yeah, so we don't want to see it. We don't want to see a lowering of the standard. I mean, that's quite clearly what we don't want to see. We want to be able to see a maintaining. But maybe some of these things, it's understandable sometimes with the legacy and all the other bits and pieces that get thrown in over the top.
Well, just to sort of get into a little bit more, another layer. So, as reported by the Sydney Morning Herald, what they pointed to, and it's got to be confirmed, is that some legacy GPS devices have a weekly counter within them that resets after 1,023 weeks. So when it gets to 1,024 weeks, there's an integer overflow and it resets. And so what they're saying is this is the problem, and it's a known problem. And the trick is being able to stay on top of that. And so
It's
that's maybe where
Y2K
the
again.
I was going to
Well,
say,
yeah.
is this a millennium bug?
well, yeah. So what they're saying is that when it flipped over,
Giving away our age, mate.
some of their devices went back 20 years.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
You know
And-
who's breathing a sigh of relief, by the way?
Optus.
Vodafone. So Vodafone went down on June the 18th. Their whole mobile network went down on June the 18th, and everyone's forgotten already. And that wasn't that long ago.
But
So-
aren't Vodafone the company, they tend to do cheaper rates, so it's really just uni students that use it. So
Yeah.
Maybe they I mean their
Or-
network build was a little bit different. They had
Boutique
some-
advisory startups.
Yeah. Their network build was a bit different though, because I remember during the sort of like, I suppose it was around about 2007, 2010 kind of time, somewhere around there. They suffered some really bad outages, but the topography of what they were doing in the network was changed completely, and they stacked in on top. So their legacy is somewhat easier to manage. It's not a massive problem. They'd actually sort of address that, and maybe that's something that others could learn from. I don't really know, but anyway.
Well, someone has to learn something. So rather than telco flogging, they're all
Yeah.
having problems, right? So
Well, yeah. They're
mean,
all yeah.
early on,
It's
we
critical
said,
infrastructure. I mean, for goodness
Yeah.
sake, this has actually been identified as, where we're going and what we're doing. I would like to pull this back to you though, Adam Green, to begin with, because there was a well-known Queensland CEO that went out and said, "Oh yeah, well, if you can bring down VicRail or the light rail down in Victoria for a whole day, that's not a Telstra problem. That's actually an architectural problem, and they shouldn't be so reliant upon one vendor." Can you give us some sort of like thoughts around that?
so having been involved in some of the work that goes on in some of those rail systems, they've got their GSM accelerators that they have to use. And he's right. For once, there's actually, there is requirement that we need to look at how we can put in some fail-safe and redundancy, but it's not very easy because of the way that tunnels work and everything else. But let's not forget that I think that the Victorian rail system has a little bit more to worry about for being able to operate their system other than telco, because when the temperature goes above 42, the tracks are inoperable because they start to warp. So, and wasn't it, what do they call it? There was this big star wheel thing in Docklands, and we'd had like a string of days of 45, and the frigging structural steel cracked. So
no.
I don't know if the steel's built differently down in Victoria, but they seem to have problems. But no, to go back to the topic though, building redundancy into those networks is a challenge because of the way that the networks use GSM and WAN optimization to communicate across the very complex rail network, because they do still have intersections where they can't just power through. They've also got freight. You've got 3 or 4 different operators, and this is on the train line, and then you've got the tram line, and you've got different intersection points and junction points with the tram lines. And you got to worry about lorries getting in the way and people jumping out in front of them. So there's a lot
budget,
to
right?
consider.
Like in all of these type of things, the first thing that gets cut for budget is redundancy,
Yeah.
because they want the service to go out for the price point. So there is a budget issue here as well. And,
Yeah.
having redundancy and saying we should have multiple avenues for this is great, but that means the cost goes up, which then means that our ticket goes from $6 to $12.
Yeah.
And so what's the reasonable halfway point?
So we're screwed here in Queensland because it's 50 cents. So they're not even maintaining the driver's sandwich for that much money. So we might be in for a while.
That's a very real problem. That is a very real problem. I mean, maintenance of a system. I mean, the 50 pence, the 50 cents is there just to sort of like cover the cost of the payment and what have you. So I mean, it's not exactly sort of like doing very much. It's a fully subsidized thing because whatever. Anyway,
I reckon they're getting a lot of overage though, because you know how you can tap on with your card. If
they
you
became
don't
a lot of
your
overage
credit
from me
card,
because I don't know whether it started or finished or ended or begun.
so instead of 50 cents, it's $5 every time you tap your credit card on and don't tap it off. So maybe they get some overage. But one thing I will say about the Telstra response, and Robert said it very clearly, but at the very moment that they were having this issue, you'll remember, Nick, I was on stage saying incident response and what we call breach fatigue now means that you can turn, my dog is trying to push me off the chair. You can turn an incident into a good story if your strategic communications are handled well. And it sounds like this has been handled a lot better than some of the more high profile Australian incidents. And trying to think how to say it without swearing, stuff ups have happened, then it seems like Telstra is actually doing a very good job of it. And they must have practiced.
Yeah. All right. So we can re-architect. We can think about those things. Maybe it's a little bit unfair to say the re-architect the whole thing and not rely upon one vendor so heavily. But there is some of that. Maybe I think that Bevan was probably suggesting that maybe there were some lazy architects out there that were just reliant upon single vendors. But
I think that's a very rough.
Allegedly, maybe
allegedly. No, I think that's a very rough assumption that's just been thrown out, and probably requires a bit more knowledge of how the rail networks work and how complex it is to make it work.
Yeah.
Ever tried to do a Teams call on a train?
Well, Teams is difficult enough in this environment, so.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's be frank. Okay, so look, moving on, I want to change the subject slightly. So in the UK at the moment, there's a by-election going on, and you've got Count Binface against somebody else who shall remain nameless because of I think. So we've got two joke candidates up in the UK, and what we're beginning to witness here in Australia is the fact that we've got a bit of a joke newspaper. And it seems to me we're getting regular joke updates from the Financial Review. But there's been a lot of them just recently, and I don't think it's really unfair to say this because a lot of them are really poorly written, they're really poor perspectives, and they are absolutely ridiculous in terms of where they're going and taking it. So there was an article this week about an AI sort of like guru, sort of trying to make himself look very special, and I think
he did look very special.
He did make himself look special. Yeah, he did make himself look special, but this actually did force a different conversation in this group anyway around the cost of AI and the blowouts of AI. And what we're beginning to see now is that, we were doing cost justification before surrounding, sort of like AI is going to take the place of a salary and all the other bits and pieces or a headcount. Now what's become apparent is the fact that you need the headcount and the AI in order to be able to achieve the oversight. And then you've got the cost blowout now because making the AI that much more or significantly more expensive. So I don't know whether I've expressed that particularly well. Adam Green, would you like to start us off on that particular round?
Yeah. So it's funny if you look at it correctly, the cost of AI has gone down, but our usage of it and how much more we're using it has gone up. And they crunched the numbers, and this was probably about 6 months ago. And please, no one shit yourselves and think you're going to lose your job tomorrow. But they did work out that to replace a full FTE with a data entry role or if I was a paralegal, I'd probably be shitting myself. But to replace one of those roles in tokens will cost between $200 to $2,000, and that's on the cost of tokens about 6 months ago, maybe a little bit more.
What's that, like per hour, per day, per year?
For the year. So you can replace the entire FTE for $2,000 to $2,000 per year in token cost.
Can we
That
can we
doesn't.
can we can we call out BS on that? But
No, it's actually there was a statistic that was run.
yeah,
It
I
doesn't.
know.
I mean,
It's,
it doesn't.
Bro,
It
I
doesn't
used
count.
Fable 5. I used Fable 5 to write a document for me. It cost $85 in tokens.
Yeah. Now,
Right.
at the time this was brought out, I think we were on like Opus 4.7 in Claude language. And it doesn't account for the fact that your Claude subscription, if you're on a max plan's like $200 a month or anything like that. But this is just the seat count replacement for the agentic AI to do that particular task. But that said, there's a lot of forecasting going on about AI winters and all that kind of stuff. And it's very hard between the doom and gloom and the people who are hedging. I don't think we're going to be losing all of our jobs anytime soon, nor should we be spending stupid amounts of money on tokens. However, I did hear about someone who's a service in a trade services business who was doing advertising, and they got really excited with what they could do with AI. And then they've turned around and gone, oh, we're spending $3,000 a day on tokens. And it's because they were using the most advanced model they could, and there's a lot of high video and image processing and things going on. So it all comes down to the way you're using it. And I know Adam Cunningham is chomping at the bit to jump in here because Adam uses AI probably as much as all three of us on this call put together, if not more.
Yeah, I built a business around AI as well. But what I'll say about it is it's the way in which you use it. I think you're 100% right. There's a lot going on around buzzwords like link engineering and all this stuff, anything when it comes to automated importance and whatnot. The issue with that is, and I have seen it in some businesses close to us, there's some other thing on the line there.
I think
I
it's
don't know
in
where
Robert's office.
Someone's agentic agent has started to talk, and I'm not allowed to say anything else or I'll get kicked off again because that's what happened last time.
You don't need to be good. Is that you, Robert?
there's somebody talking very loudly next in the meeting room next door. So I'm not sure what I can do about that, guys.
That's what it is.
No, but sorry. So Adam, can you just
put
finish
myself
the
on
point?
mute.
Can you just finish the point because I know Robert's really sort of like aching to get onto this.
So from my perspective, it's how you do things, keeping the human in the loop, understanding what workloads you have in AI. A business that's close to me at the moment just got a bill for 75 grand for the month because they had agents running 24/7 that unfortunately had failed and just kept burning tokens. This stuff happened.
How many AI cat videos did they get from that though? Is the important thing.
No, it's research agents. This is the problem, right? But it wasn't actually putting an output. It was literally doing a whole bunch of research 24/7 for a month. 75K was their bill for that. So it's real.
Yeah.
So
cost overlay and what have you. Robert, did you have a final point to make about that particular subject?
I think there's probably a couple of things. Just picking up on when I said calling BS, I think there's a lot of debate around the business case of replacing humans with AI, and I think it's heavily overstated. So I think there's a challenge there. So I think there's something in that, and I think that kind of leads to at least that kind of overall governance of, okay, so we're going to introduce AI. We're going to sort of get onto a similar story. We're going to introduce AI, but what does that actually mean? What projects are we going to actually implement, and how are we going to measure return on investment? And we've seen a lot of articles saying actually maybe the majority of these AI transformation products aren't actually delivering on the return on investment that they should be. So I think there's something to talk about there. Maybe another time. The other thing is around. I think there's been an interesting shift around incentives. So there was a whole lot of promotion of how amazing it was, how legendary it was if you burn through huge amounts of tokens, because it showed how much you were using AI. And so we saw this particularly from companies like Meta, for example, and they had a leaderboard. to show how who was using AI the most, and it creates perverse incentives where people will just be running AI agents 24/7 and pushing themselves up the leaderboard so they could become a legendary AI token user. And now there's been a kind
up
of
that list were the consultancies, just out of interest, asking for a friend.
Good.
Yeah, there we go. And so I think there's been a little bit of a backlash to that, because particularly as we see stories now about the cost of burning through all these tokens. So it's now sort of been changing from being a leaderboard to usage and putting controls around that as well, making sure that if your agent doesn't run away without supervision to try and curb costs. So I think there's been a bit of a shift, and I think I saw an article from the CEO of Palo Alto, for example. I think in the last 24 hours, saying, hey, the cost of tokens needs to come down 90% in the next 12 months in order to make things scalable. In order to continue the viability of the use of AI, you've got to bring the cost down. So there's quite a few business related, governance related sort of discussions in there as well.
So
I think there's one. Sorry, Nick. I think there's one last thing on this around it replacing humans that people aren't talking about. So Gen AI specifically can't make decisions. It doesn't understand rationale. Therefore, it can't take over a role of a human being who makes decisions consistently every day. So this is something that people aren't talking about, talking around this all across the board. But until we start going into neural net AI and actually thinking, Gen AI doesn't do that at all. It just takes input and creates output.
I think listening to that, I think my Gen AI must be based in Spain, because it keeps wanting me to take a siesta and it keeps telling me off. So it's actually trying to make me less productive and telling me to do less
tomorrow,
work.
Adam. Mañana.
Yeah.
Like, seriously, the amount of times it tells me off and goes, I'm like, no, we just need to do this. And it comes back and goes, I'm going to pull you up there. I'm not doing that. You told me you were going to do, and then today it told me it was Saturday. And I was like, check yourself. It's Tuesday. And then it came back and went, well, now what I'm saying really sticks. You're over budget now by 3 days. I'm like,
Yeah. So my takeaway from all of that, and going back to Robert's point, is measure stupid things and get stupid results, right? So, I mean, it's just, trying to burn through as many tokens as you possibly can. You're going to get stupid results. I mean, it's just simple. KPIs, understand what the problem question is, understand where you're going and what you're doing. It's, it takes you back to that stupid bloody article in the Fin Review, which was, how many different ways can you burn toast? Okay, that's going to be that subject. The last one is cybersecurity is a boardroom problem. And that was brought to us by an AICD article or paper that was released in the last week. Robert, would you like to give us a swift overview on this? Because this was the most comprehensive, well, maybe not the most comprehensive, but it was certainly the most specific in terms of what it's actually trying to get people to do now all of a sudden, yeah?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's common sense stuff, but essentially AICD, in conjunction with UTS, the Human Technology Institute, put out an updated governance document for AI and boards. And look, it's a lot of common sense in there. We sort of opened up with, AI is a board issue, or words to that effect. And of course, it's always been a board issue. I mean, nothing's really changed. But I guess as there's more focus on it, and look, I mean, we can point to all sorts of things. We can point to APRA and ASIC sending out notifications to all members to make sure that they're incorporating AI governance in their thinking. We can look at Five Eyes and saying you've got to take AI seriously. You can get into specific details and look at the case law that's come out recently, fixed securities and the like. So clearly, everyone is pointing to the fact that AI is not just an IT issue, not just a cybersecurity issue. It is a board issue. It is a business issue, and so they've updated this guidance. It's practical. It's common sense. It's not going to really, move anything in terms of like there's no sort of huge surprises in there. But in terms of just a starting point, it's got some useful resources. How you should think about AI, think about the risks, thinking about putting in a governance structure. Here are the laws that you need to think about when you're thinking about your implementation, your plans. So it's got some good resources. It's got some starting points in there, but but clearly it's just it's a starting point. And really the key thing is you got to be having those discussions and making it a whole of business problem.
So the good thing about this is that all of a sudden we're starting to get some very specific advice rather than this wishy-washy, oh, it depends where you live and it depends what time of day it is and it depends whether you've got a pointy hat or a round hat and all that kind of shit. So all of a sudden now what we're beginning to see is some very, very good common sense advice coming out. Adam Cunningham, I'd just like to sort of like bring you in on this one because where do people go to get good advice?
So it's changing now. People used to have advisors on retainers and, from large firms or whatever. What I've been seeing lately is that people are starting to go to bespoke experts. So smaller agencies that deal with just the one thing they want to talk about so that they can get an expert opinion on what goes on. The other thing that's changed mindset-wise in a lot of boards these days is the feel that every company is a tech company now. So there's very few companies out there that can run without technology. And there's a lot of boards recently that look at, from a governance perspective, where is the company going and what is the foundations to make it get there? And technology is simply one of the foundations to get there. So it's starting, this is why AI has become a big factor in boards, because they're looking at what are the foundational components to get us to where it is we're going, and then how do we govern making the business get there? And now it has just become a pillar for them in the same way that risk was, or the same way that the financial side of things was. So it's definitely maturing from that perspective, and board members who have been in boards for many years are upskilling. It's quite interesting to see, and even boards are starting to pull in people from a very different background now to sit on their boards for that reason.
Okay. So final word from Adam Green then around this. I mean, we're obviously speaking somewhat about this kind of thing last week when we were up in PNG. But
Yeah.
I mean, what's the final word from you, mate?
Yeah, so I'd echo what Adam's saying. And the proof in that is, and this isn't a shameless plug, but the proof in that is I've been getting called in quite regularly now to review something that's been done by a table brand. And they're like, right, we want you to have a look at this and actually disseminate what's achievable and what's not. And I can tell you from my experience, like when I used to run a cyber warfare capability, if you let someone come in and structure the arena in a way that it's all the best practice whitelisting stuff that they'd been given by a big consultancy, they couldn't manage the environment. In fact, we'd kick off the warfare scenario and they'd sit there talking and going, when are we starting? And we're like, it's been 45 minutes. We've already taken over half your estate. And the point there is a lot of these best practice assessments, which is the back up the truck and roll out the playbook from large firms, because, I know you're a small to medium enterprise that is structured, like focused on civil engineering. But for a moment, imagine you're a large bank in America and this is what you should do. So Adam's point there, where they get boutique firms in who specialize in those specific areas and have absolute domain expertise in those areas, can then come in and look at the way that strategy is run or the incident response is run or their AI governance is run, and they can actually make something that's the right fit for the business they are versus the last business they walked out the back door of.
Yeah. So I think smaller is better, maybe. It would be a nice mantra and a nice way to finish. I don't know whether anybody's got one last word before we close off. That's great. That was my last word. So thank you, gents. That's chat for this week. Looking forward to catching up with you again real soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.